To be sensitive is to have the propensity to quickly detect or respond to slight changes. I think as children, our lack of experience and knowledge causes us to be overly sensitive. The first time you encounter something, it's a big deal. The second time, it's still a big deal, just not as much as the first time. By the 5th or 10th time it happens, you barely even acknowledge it. I think about the first time I had a Sour Patch Kid sour gummy candy. My lips may have actually puckered. The candy, for those of you who have not had the pleasure, hits you with a burst of sour flavor, followed by a sweet, sugary candy flavor. After decades of enjoying this little treat, I now need to put handfuls of them into my mouth for them to have any effect at all. What I have observed in my time is that as we get older, there are fewer things that warrant further thought. We get wrapped up in what we are doing and realize that most things will eventually work themselves out. I raise this to explain why I didn't really give what happened at the ladies too much thought at the time. In retrospect, perhaps I should have, but honestly, I'm not sure much would have changed. I went home that night. I had dinner with my family. We watched television and then started the nighttime process of getting everyone tucked in and asleep, including my wife and me. The next morning was business as usual. The next few weeks passed by uneventfully. It was back to the grind, falling back into the routine, work during the week, and kids' sporting events on the weekends. I had heard of menopause. No, that is not a typo. That was what I intended to write. It's kind of like menopause, only for men. Another way of saying it is midlife crisis. Now, honestly, I was only in my early 40s, so I think I was a little early for that. But at the time, I thought that was what I felt. The days were running together, I no longer enjoyed the work, and my time away from work was spent worrying about work. I wasn't even able to enjoy my time away or at home. As I said before, the money was good, but I was no longer feeling that what I was being paid was worth the toll it was having on me, my family, or our life together. I know how that sounds. It sounds awful. I had a good job, making good money, and I'm complaining about it. I should have been content and shut my mouth, and for the most part I did, or at least I tried to. I was swiftly becoming increasingly unhappy. What was so frustrating about it all was that I wasn't even really sure why. I recognized that I had more than my fair share of good fortune. Intellectually I knew this, but still I was unhappy. Let me also be clear. This was not a new situation for me. I had been feeling this way for some time, maybe a few years before, about the time my son was born. At first, it was just little random moments of feeling blue. Eventually, these moments increased in intensity and duration until they seemed to last for weeks at a time. The sensation also increased from one of simple boredom or listlessness to full-blown depression. I tried not to dwell on this, but rather just push through, hoping it would resolve on its own. I know. First world problem, right? I know. I feel awful writing about it. But I feel it is necessary to help explain what came next. It had been a few months since that night at the ladies. That night that I saw the woman staring at me with that look of annoyance on her face, like she had done something for me that I did not adequately appreciate. Ridiculous. I did not even know who the hell she was. As I mentioned before, I am a lawyer. Wait, don't hate me yet. It is very fashionable to hate lawyers and blame them for many of the evils in this world. Well, I guess not really this world, but at least this society. Actually, that's not really true. Didn't Shakespeare himself say, "Let's kill all the lawyers"? That was in a different country hundreds of years ago. Maybe the hatred of my vocation is, in fact, universal. Correction. I looked it up. Yes, on the internet. It was actually one of Shakespeare's characters that said it in one of his plays. The aim of the action, the killing of the lawyers, was to disrupt law and order. Shakespeare actually intended for the line to compliment lawyers and judges, implying they were actually responsible for bringing justice to society. Who knew? That being said, it cannot be argued that lawyers hold a very special place in the hearts and minds of your typical American. Many see lawyers as greedy opportunists who will trade morality for dollars any day of the week. There are some like that, the ambulance chasers, The type of lawyer who would represent a 19-year-old habitual plaintiff like the one I introduced you to before. Those types of lawyers do not care whether or not there was an actual wrong that needed to be righted or not. All they care about is that there is money to be made. I was actually at a mediation in which a plaintiff's attorney stood up and said, "What I am going to say may not be the truth. It may not be right. But it is what I will tell a jury, and I will win a verdict." Sadly, testimony at mediations is not admissible. However, I was not an ambulance chaser. In fact, I was quite the opposite. I am a civil defense lawyer, and I'd like to say that I try and prevent people from gaming the system. Although I am sure there are those who would argue that I protect big business to the detriment of the common man, and while that may be true, it is not intentional. My primary drive is to protect the rest of us from those trying to game the system. In my experience, the gamers make up the majority of those plaintiffs who bring lawsuits. In those rare situations where I truly believe the plaintiff was wronged, I have talked my client into settling a little higher than I should have. Please don't tell that to the state bar. I did have one plaintiff's case early in my career. Teresa Cleghorn was my supervisor when I first started working at the university hospital. On the outside, she was a competent laboratory scientist and no-nonsense drill sergeant of a supervisor. Inside, she was a very loving and giving woman who was driven to succeed by a severe personal insecurity that I never managed to learn the cause of. For whatever reason, she felt the need to prove that she was capable. If you doubted, she set out to prove it to you, but not overtly. Instead, she would simply kill herself trying to get you to notice it, and if you did not, she would just simply try all the harder. As my boss, she led from the front, while simultaneously pushing from behind. Those who fell out of step or could not keep pace, she would take them and privately coddle them. If this did not work, she helped them out the door and privately mourned them. Although she never openly admitted it, she felt that their failures in the workplace were simply caused by her failures as a supervisor and friend. She was driving to work early one morning. It was late autumn. The sun was not up yet, and a freezing rain was making the road very slick. As she came up over a hill on a poorly lit back country road, she suddenly saw a huge concrete tube in the beams of her headlights. She swerved to avoid it, only to hit the other two that were sitting nearby. The tubes were actually concrete manhole inserts. They are basically concrete tubes about 3 feet wide at the top that broaden out to about 5 feet in width in the bottom. These are typically placed into the street to provide support for manholes and manhole covers. Unfortunately, these were not in the street, they were on it. 20 minutes earlier, a flatbed truck had turned onto the roadway with an unsecured load of these things. These 3 had rolled off and landed in the roadway without the driver ever realizing it. When her car struck the first, the passenger compartment of the car collapsed and the dashboard pulverized her legs and pelvis. Because she hit the insert on a slight angle, her car spun slowly and careened from the roadway. It bounced off one of the other inserts before slamming into a massive oak on the side of the road. In addition to the crush injuries to her lower body, she also shattered her left shoulder and elbow and suffered a punctured lung when one of her fractured ribs punched through it. She was trapped in her car and in a tremendous amount of pain. Despite her injuries, she managed to pull open her damaged glove box and retrieve her cell phone. She called 911 and then she called work to let them know she'd be coming in late that day. Over the next few years, she underwent numerous surgeries and countless hours of rehabilitation. She was eventually able to return to work at a reduced capacity, but she was never quite the same. I am now able to write dispassionately about this now. That was almost 20 years ago. At the time, it was quite upsetting. I got to know Teresa on a personal level and for a time counted her as one of my closest friends. She had been very driven and very athletic before the accident. She competed in marathons and ballroom dance competitions and frequently traveled to attend events all over the country. After the accident, she became a different person. I know that sounds cliche, but with her it was true. The accident left her with a permanent limp, and she found that running and dancing had not only become difficult, but painful. Her work also suffered as she became preoccupied with her injuries and situation. She sunk into a sorrowful depression, and the last I had heard from her, she was not working and was fighting to continue to receive Social Security benefits. I was able to settle the matter with the driver's company. The evidence showed that the load had been placed on the truck the night before, and the driver never confirmed it was secured before leaving the facility. The company tried to hide evidence that the driver never checked the load, and tried to pass blame onto the manufacturer of the device that was supposed to have been used to keep the load on the truck. If the case had gone to trial, I was sure we would have been awarded punitive damages. The company knew it too. The payout was in the millions of dollars, but most of what Teresa received went to her care. Although she never told me so, there is no doubt in my mind that she would have traded it all away to have been allowed to be herself again, if only for a short while. Really, the only positive thing that came out of that matter was my fee. My wife and I were just starting out, both fresh out of graduate school, and neither one of us was making enough to outpace our student loans. In fact, we were contemplating moving in with her parents, a possibility that I think would have placed a significant strain on our relationship. I will admit now that had we been forced to live with them, I'm not entirely confident that our marriage would have survived it. We certainly dodged a bullet there. To be honest, I think it was me who dodged that bullet. My fee from the case was significant. We were able to pay down some of our loans and place a small down payment on our first home. Professionally, the case also jump-started my career and gave me a small bit of recognition in the local legal community. There is no doubt the publicity that came out of it was a key factor in my being recruited by Eric Cook's firm shortly thereafter. For us, it was quite a boon, but maybe not for Teresa. Thinking about it now kind of makes me feel sad. Maybe I was an ambulance chaser.